I don't know where to start on how appalling this is, because the implication is that Ukraine should concede territory in negotiations that it has fought and people have died for to protect in battle.
Now we're in the company of two brilliant guests. Alison Phillips, columnist for The New Statesman, former editor-in-chief of The Mirror, and Guto, Harri, former No. 10 Director of Communications and BBC chief political correspondent as well. Let's talk about President Trump's envoy to Ukraine, General Keith Kellogg, who's on the front page of The Times today, suggesting that Ukraine should be organised. Partitioned is the word that's used. He's sort of sought to clarify that, but I'm not sure if it might just be a kind of semantic clarification, because the quote is almost like Berlin after World War II as part of a peace deal. Seems pretty clear what the implication is in all of that. Guto, shall I come to you first on this? Because the suggestion, for those who may not have read the article quite yet or been with us since 6 o'clock this morning, is that Ukraine could be divided into zones like Berlin after the Second World War. And the idea is that the west of Ukraine would be sort of propped up, I guess, by a reassurance force of Western allies, that the east of Ukraine would remain under Russian control since they have taken it over, and that there would be a demilitarised zone somewhere resembling the middle, with Ukrainian forces in it as well. First of all, partition. Do you think that is the appropriate word for what he's suggesting?
I think it's the appropriate word. I don't know where to start on how appalling this is, because the implication is that Ukraine should concede territory in negotiations that it has fought and people have died for to protect in battle. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it's comparing Ukraine, an innocent bystander and a victim of Russian aggression, with Germany in the Second World War, which initiated the Second World War. And the reason Germany was split down the middle and Berlin split into four was because it was the default of where the armies pushing back the attempted takeover of the world by Germany ended up. And the idea was that Germany, as an aggressive nation at the time, needed to be controlled, none of which applies to Ukraine. And the third reason, which is missing the whole point about this war, is that we believe in a world where not only for the Ukraine, but it's good for the rest of us, where sovereign, independent, democratic nations are not invaded by, bullying neighbours with autocratic lunatics at the helm. And so he seems to lack a grasp of history, certainly any sort of moral compass. And I think this is really one of those dreadful things that needs to be called out and battered off the sort of agenda.
Yeah. I think it's difficult to disagree with most of that, Alison. One of my thoughts on this, however, just to go alongside, is that Steve Witkoff, the US Special Envoy to the Middle East, met with President Putin yesterday. And I think the timing of all of this is just quite striking. Now, I'm not sure when the interview with Keith Kellogg was done. However, here it is on the front page of the Times today, while another envoy from the US is meeting with the actual president of Russia. And you can kind of just start building a bit of a sense of how the US administration's approaching this whole thing.
It really is. And it's interesting because Keith Kellogg, I think, initially was regarded as somebody who was more understanding towards Ukraine and Zelensky. And then he's come out with this, which I think, as Guto says, the main point he just seems to have forgotten in all of this is that Germany was the aggressor in the Second World War and that actually they completely lost in the Second World War. So in this case, Ukraine was an entirely innocent state that was invaded. And think back to, when it was the Crimea incident earlier as well. And not only that, Ukraine has done a very good job of trying to protect as much of its territory as it can. There also seems to be a bit of a misunderstanding if the belief is that Putin is going to be happy with taking land to the east of the Dnipro River and then he'll say, fine, that's it, I'm done. There is absolutely no doubt that Putin wants to take all of Ukraine. And not only that, he wants to end its sense of itself as a sovereign nation. So this really isn't going to cut any mustard with anybody. But what I think is interesting that this is happening now is it because there's been no movement on the negotiations with Putin and it's now felt that there's going to have to show even more of a hand to try and entice Putin to the table, because otherwise it is going to become very, very embarrassing for the Trump administration if it cannot do the deal that it's so long boasted that it will be able to do very, very swiftly.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think one of the other things that's observed in the Times today is it's unclear why any partition in Ukraine would even be necessary. We've been discussing a reassurance force in the event of a ceasefire ceasefire for weeks. That's kind of the direction of European leaders in all of this. And so having soldiers in Ukraine surely would be the deterrence to any further Russian aggression as well. And so actually, what is the point of a proposed partition? You know,
there's also another very interesting line in that story as well, which says that despite really not getting any further forward with any kind of peace deal, what the Americans have been able to do this week is get a team on the ground checking out all the essential minerals in Ukraine that the Americans would like to take as part of the deal for ongoing protection. So they're not slow on that little bit of it.
Yeah.
Mothers and fathers of some of the dead hostages, and we're really looking to get that war stopped. They're losing 2,500 and even more than that young people a week. They're Russian and they're Ukrainian. They're not American, but they're people, and we're seeing if we can get it stopped. And I think we're making progress. I appreciate the ballerina who was released. It was at the request of a very good friend of all of ours, actually. Dana White called me and he said it's the friend or the relationship of one of the fighters for UFC or one of the fighters. And Dana's an incredible guy, and we spoke to President Putin about it, and they made a deal. They released the young ballerina, and she is now out, and that was good. So we appreciate that. We hope that we're going to be able to make a deal relatively soon with Russia and Ukraine to stop the fighting. It's so senseless. It's such a horrible thing. It would have never happened if I were president, but it did happen, and we were given that card, and I think we're going to get it. I think we're going to get it stopped. Got to get going. Deals that are proper for the United States, not just we can make deals easy.
Will come to order. I first want to say congratulations, Ambassador Greer, on your confirmation.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thanks for being here. USMCA, you did an incredible job. And
so first, was this an oversight, or is the president trying to reinvigorate trade with Russia?
So there's no effort to reinvigorate trade with Russia. Congress did the right thing a couple of years ago and revoked permanent normal trade relations with Russia, so put it in the bad category. And so Belarus, Russia, North Korea, they already have their own high tariffs already in a category that Congress has established.
So it doesn't matter. They're not part of this
Well,
system.
it does matter. They already have these high tariffs. They don't have permanent normal trade relations. We have normal trade relations with these others. And I think if there's
So
trade with
why are the
Russia,
penalties that much more, why are the tariffs that much more higher on other country and allies than they are in Russia? Because we're already doing enough with Russia?
No, it's because in the sanctions law, there's always an exclusion for agricultural products, and I think that's the only type of trade we really have with Russia. But all of those folks, they're sanctioned, they're subject to embargoes of one type or another. Congress revoked permanent normal trade relations, and that's certainly the right answer for those folks. We should not have normal trade relations with those countries.
It does increase, you will add additional tariffs.
Well, it's the president's choice, but I'll advise him, and I'll say this is affecting the trade deficit.
We're working with you on USMCA, and
you do. Are you going to bring that to Congress for a vote?
We'll do what the law requires. Some of it's consultation, some requires a vote. So we'll follow the law on that front. But the countries are coming, right? If they were hesitant, they wouldn't be knocking down
all the work you put in on USMCA. And happy.
And those are actually many of the countries that are coming to us and saying, we're willing to take down our tariffs. Vietnam unilaterally decided to reduce its tariffs on apples, cherries, certain corn products, ethanol, et cetera. So we're already seeing the kind of movement we would expect, and that's something that I think is an important message to our farmers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ambassador.
And so I think what we're going to see in the near term, we're going to see a handful of partners who open their markets more to us, and it makes it much easier and much more competitive economically to have manufacturing here, to grow products here, to process them here, and export them to the rest of the world.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador, it's good to see you in a different capacity.
In the near term, there is an opportunity for these countries, if they want to have more reciprocal trade, to bring down their differential tariffs, bring down their non-tariff.
Mr. Ambassador, you, your predecessor, Bob Lighthizer, we need to go back to what we did, Mr. Ambassador, with USMCA, with a real solid negotiation that led to a desirable outcome.
For availing yourself here today on such important matters. Ambassador Greer, could you elaborate on your engagement with these countries, Kenya and UK?
Over the past month, I've had a number of conversations with my counterpart in the United Kingdom. We've talked about non-tariff barriers in the UK. We've talked about ways to collaborate on technology. We've met frequently in person. We've had phone calls. We've had virtual meetings, and we've discussed how to move the relationship forward on an economic basis. I've certainly expressed my concern that UK has barriers, especially in the ag space, that are very important for us. So that's been made clear to them. But those discussions are on a good footing. With Kenya, I also had my counterpart, the trade minister from Kenya, in town last week, and we sat down in my office and we had a good talk, and he said that he wanted to engage with the United States. He understands our concerns, but he also understands the need to move forward. It was a very fruitful conversation. I look forward to speaking with him again.
Yes or no, the Trump tariffs will soon be levied on pharmaceuticals from abroad?
I'd like to discuss that in more detail with you, sir.
Is that true or not?
Well, the president, he wants to get manufacturing production back here, and so he's going to conduct an investigation to see what's appropriate in terms of tariffs.
So he hasn't decided to impose them as he said he would last night at the Republican fundraiser?
He said that he will impose them. Now what the extent of that is subject to an investigation.
Reclaiming my time.
I believe in our great country.